The purchased Daniel had always been fascinated with the newest technology that hit the markets of the sprawling city he called home. Tall towers reached up to the sky. Screens lit every corner, and everywhere people moved about with their robotic assistants, drones, and smart pets. These pets were the latest craze, little machines designed to mimic loyalty and companionship, something to fill the empty rooms of many city apartments. Daniel had been saving for months, tired of coming back to his small place and feeling the weight of silence. He had seen the ads, colorful and loud, promising joy, fun, and even a touch of affection in a mechanical form. Finally, one evening after his shift at the loading docks, he walked through the neon-filled alleys of the tech market and stopped at a booth that looked different from the others. The booth owner, a thin man with sharp eyes, smiled too quickly as Daniel approached. His table was not like the polished stores down the street. It was covered in strange capsules, sleek and glossy, each one humming with a faint light as if alive. Daniel asked what they were, and the man leaned forward, whispering that these were the latest generation of smart pets, far more advanced than anything sold in the official stores. They could learn faster, bond deeper, and even surprise their owners with new tricks. Daniel felt both excited and uneasy, but the thought of owning something unique, something special, was too strong. He handed over nearly all his savings, and the man pushed the capsule across the table. It was cold to the touch, heavier than Daniel expected, and there was something about the way it pulsed faintly that made him shiver. Carrying it home through the crowded trains and streets, Daniel could not stop thinking about what kind of pet would emerge. Maybe a cat-shaped machine or a clever drone that could speak. He imagined laughter and comfort filling his apartment. When he finally reached his room and set the capsule on the table, he hesitated. The instructions were written in a language he did not recognize, symbols that looked alien, not just foreign. He pressed the only button on its surface, and the capsule opened with a soft hiss, light spilling into the darkened room. What came out was not a mechanical pet. It was a figure small and delicate, a girl with strange pale skin that glowed faintly under the room light. Her hair a silver blue that shimmered like liquid metal. She gasped for air and looked around with wide eyes that reflected Daniel's face. She was no robot. She was alive. Daniel stumbled back in shock, his chair crashing behind him. The girl curled on the table, trembling, clutching her thin arms to her chest. Daniel's first instinct was fear. He thought of calling the authorities or rushing back to the market, but something in the girl's eyes stopped him. They were not empty or hostile. They were frightened and pleading, like the eyes of someone lost in a strange world. She tried to speak, but the words came out broken like fragments of sound. Daniel slowly stepped closer, his hands open to show he meant no harm. He whispered that it was okay, that she was safe. The girl blinked, tilting her head, and then let out a soft sound almost like a whimper. She reached out one trembling hand toward him. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He could not treat her as some object, as a pet. She was more than that. She was alive, confused, and clearly in need of help. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and helped her down from the table. She was unsteady, her legs weak, and she leaned against him as if every ounce of strength was gone. That night, Daniel did not sleep. He sat across from her as she lay curled on the couch wrapped in his old blanket. She breathed softly, her chest rising and falling like any other living being. Yet the faint glow of her skin reminded him she was not human. His mind raced with questions. Where had she come from? Who was she? Why was she hidden in a capsule sold as a pet? He had no answers, only the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. In the quiet of the night, Daniel whispered to himself that he could not let anyone know. The authorities would take her, scientists would experiment on her, and the corporation that owned most of the city would claim her as property. He looked at her sleeping form and realized he had made a choice already. He would protect her. Whatever she was, however strange, she was now under his care. As dawn lit the skyline outside his window, Daniel sat with his head in his hands. He had wanted a pet to keep him company. Instead, he had found a secret that could change his life forever. The girl stirred and opened her eyes, meeting his gaze with a faint smile of trust. Daniel felt his heart clench again. He whispered softly, "You are not a pet. You are something more." He knew at that moment his life would never be the same. The caregiver. The morning after the capsule opened, Daniel's life no longer felt ordinary. He had once believed his biggest worries were paying rent and working long shifts at the docks, but now he had a secret breathing softly on his couch wrapped in his blanket. The girl was awake by the time he gathered his courage to approach her again, and she sat with wide eyes filled with confusion, but also curiosity. She touched the fabric of the blanket, running her fingers over the threads as if even the smallest thing in his world was new to her. Daniel crouched nearby and tried to smile, though his heart pounded hard. He asked if she could understand him, and though her lips moved, the sounds were broken and halting. She tilted her head with frustration when the words failed, but Daniel noticed how quickly. She tried again, listening carefully as if each syllable was a puzzle she could solve. He decided to call her Lyra because the sound of the name felt gentle and he could not keep calling her girl in his mind. When he said the name, she repeated it slowly, her voice soft and musical even in its weakness, and when she smiled at managing to copy him, Daniel felt warmth spread through his chest. It was the first small connection between them. Taking care of Lyra was not easy. She stumbled when she tried to walk, and Daniel had to steady her by the arm. Her steps were clumsy, like those of a child learning to stand for the first time. She grew tired quickly and needed to rest often. When he offered her food from his kitchen, she tasted it cautiously, sniffing and frowning at most things. She spat out a piece of bread, shaking her head, but when he boiled rice and mixed it with broth, she ate carefully and then more eagerly. Daniel realized she had to learn what her body could accept, and he made notes to remember which things she liked. The hardest part was language. She listened to everything he said, repeating words over and over with remarkable focus. Daniel wrote words on a small pad and pointed at objects in the room. Chair, table, window, door, water, food, sleep. She repeated them like a student hungry for knowledge. By the end of the first week, she could form simple sentences, though awkward and heavy with pauses. She looked at him one evening and said clearly, "You help me." The words were rough, but the meaning was clear, and it struck Daniel deeply. As the days passed, Daniel grew protective of her. He pulled the curtains at night so no one could see inside. He avoided neighbors and refused invitations from coworkers. When he went to work, he locked the door and prayed she would remain hidden. Each time he returned, he expected disaster, but instead found her waiting, sometimes smiling, sometimes curled up asleep, but always safe. The apartment no longer felt silent and cold. It felt alive. One night, when rain pattered against the glass, Daniel asked her softly where she came from. Lyra frowned, struggling with the words, and finally shook her head. She pressed her hand against her chest and then against her temple, as if to say she could not remember, or perhaps could not explain. Daniel wanted answers, but he saw the pain in her eyes, so he let the question fall away. Instead, he told her stories about his own childhood, how his parents had left him early, and how he had worked since he was young. She listened closely, as if every detail mattered. Her presence began to change him. Daniel, who once lived only for routine, now woke each day with purpose. He cleaned more, cooked better meals, and even laughed when Lyra mimicked his words in funny tones. She showed emotion, easily tears when she was frustrated, soft laughter when he stumbled on a word in return. Slowly, the distance between alien and human shrank, and in its place grew trust. One evening, while cooking dinner, Daniel cut his finger on the edge of a tin. It was a shallow slice, but it bled more than he expected. Lyra gasped and hurried to him, grabbing his hand with surprising strength. Her eyes glowed faintly as she pressed her palm over the wound. Daniel felt warmth spread through his skin, and when she pulled her hand back, the cut had already sealed, leaving only a faint mark. They stared at each other in silence. Daniel realized she was not only alive, but carried something far beyond human ability. Lyra trembled as if frightened of what she had revealed, but Daniel touched her shoulder gently and whispered that it was all right. That night he could not sleep again. His mind replayed the moment of her healing touch. He had thought she was only lost and weak, but now he understood she possessed powers that could not be explained by science he knew. It made him even more determined to shield her from the world. He imagined what the corporations would do if they discovered her, what the scientists would tear apart in their hunger for knowledge. He promised himself silently that he would never allow that. As Lyra slept beside the soft glow of the lamp, Daniel stared out the window at the endless towers and lights of the city. He had bought a smart pet to ease his loneliness. But instead he had become the guardian of a being who might change everything humanity knew about life in the universe. The wait was terrifying, but the bond was stronger. He whispered again the name he had given her, Lyra, and knew that from now on every choice he made would be for her safety. Strange abilities, Daniel's small apartment had become more than a home. It was now a shelter for a secret he could barely believe himself. Each day Lyra grew stronger. Where once she could barely stand without help, she now moved with more confidence and her steps no longer faltered. She practiced words with him each evening and soon her sentences became smoother, though her accent was strange and her rhythm unusual. Sometimes Daniel would pause and watch her as she studied an object as simple as a spoon or a clock with fascination. It was as though she carried the eyes of someone seeing the world for the first time. One afternoon, Daniel returned from work to find the apartment unusually bright. Lyra stood near the window with her hand lifted toward the glass. The sunlight that streamed in bent strangely around her fingers, creating shimmering patterns across the walls. When she noticed him, she dropped her hand quickly as if embarrassed. Daniel asked what she had been doing, but she shook her head. Her eyes carried both fear and determination, and he decided not to press her. Still, the image remained with him. Over the next days, other moments revealed themselves. Daniel once left his old wristwatch on the table, broken as it had been for years. Lyra picked it up, turning it over in her small hands, and within minutes the device ticked again as though repaired by unseen hands. Another time, when Daniel struggled with a knot in a rope, she reached out lightly, and the knot seemed to unravel on its own, as if responding to her thought. Daniel knew he could no longer pretend these were small tricks. Lyra carried abilities that belonged to no human. The discovery both frightened and amazed him. He wondered how far her abilities reached and whether she even understood them. One evening as they shared food, he asked gently if she remembered who she was. Lyra looked down and for a long time remained silent. Finally, she whispered that she was not from here and placed a hand over her heart. She could not explain more, but Daniel felt the truth heavy in the air. He realized the capsule had never been a toy or pet at all. It was something far more significant. At night, Daniel began to notice other changes. The air around the apartment sometimes hummed softly as though charged with energy. Lights flickered without cause and his old power meter spun faster than usual. He feared the city grid might detect it. Already the corporation that oversaw utilities in his district had a reputation for tracing irregularities. Daniel worried that one day someone would knock on his door asking why his tiny home consumed more energy than the others. Lyra sensed his worry. One night as rain tapped against the window, she spoke haltingly, saying she did not want to bring danger. Her words were simple, but the emotion in her tone was clear. Daniel shook his head and told her she was not a danger to him, but a gift, though a secret one that others would not understand. He promised he would keep her safe. She reached across the table then and touched his hand, her skin warm with that faint glow he had come to know. Still, the signs grew harder to hide. One afternoon, a neighbor passing in the hallway paused and mentioned hearing strange hums from Daniel's apartment. Daniel laughed it off, but his heart raced as soon as the door shut. He realized the secret was fragile. He began buying thicker curtains and even layered extra material against the walls to dampen sound. He told Lyra they needed to be more careful, and she nodded, though a shadow of worry crossed her face. Yet despite the fear, Daniel could not deny the bond between them deepened. Lyra's laughter filled his rooms. She learned songs from the old radio and hummed them softly while cooking with him. She asked about the stars she saw from his window, and Daniel found himself speaking of constellations, though he was no expert. She listened with bright eyes and whispered that she remembered stars too, though different ones. Each word she shared was like a fragile thread tying her past to the present. The breaking point came late one evening when Daniel cut power to the apartment after noticing the meter spike again. He hoped to calm the readings before officials noticed. As they sat in the dark, Lyra grew restless. She closed her eyes, and within seconds the small lamps flickered to life, though unplugged from the grid. The soft glow spread across the room like fireflies. Daniel stared in awe and fear. Lyra opened her eyes and whispered sorry as if she had lost control. Daniel realized then that hiding her would become impossible if such abilities continued to grow. He paced the room later that night, his thoughts heavy. He had wanted only companionship when he bought the capsule, but now he was guardian to a being who could bend light repair machines, and perhaps even more. Lyra watched him with sadness, knowing his fear, though he tried to mask it. Finally, he sat beside her and told her firmly that no matter what powers she had, he would not abandon her. She was his responsibility, and more than that, she was his friend. Lyra smiled faintly and leaned against his shoulder. In that moment, Daniel knew the future would not allow them peace for long. Secrets this large did not stay hidden in a city built on surveillance and control. Somewhere out there, others would be searching for her. and when they came, Daniel would have to choose whether to stand against them or surrender the only bond he had ever truly cherished. Discovery and danger. Weeks that followed turned Daniel's quiet existence into one of constant caution. Lyra grew more skilled with language and could now hold conversations that almost sounded natural. She asked questions about everything from the taste of different fruits to the reason why the city's towers never seemed to sleep. Daniel answered as best he could, but deep down he knew each answer pulled her deeper into a world that was not hers. She learned faster than any child, as though her mind had been built for absorbing knowledge. But with each display of talent and each small use of her strange abilities, Daniel's worry grew heavier. The first sign of real danger came when he returned home one evening to find the lock on his door scratched. Nothing inside was missing and Lyra was safe, but the message was clear. Someone had been trying to get in. He tightened security the best he could, but he knew locks would not hold forever against those who truly wanted entry. He warned Lyra never to open the door for anyone but him. She nodded, but the fear in her eyes showed she already understood. Only days later, the knock finally came. It was not a neighbor or delivery worker. Men in dark coats stood in the hallway, their faces unreadable. They claimed to be inspectors from the Energy Bureau checking unusual spikes in consumption. Daniel's heart pounded as he let them inside. They carried scanning devices and their eyes searched every corner of the small apartment. Lyra hid in the bedroom silent and still, but Daniel felt as if the walls themselves would betray them. When the men finally left, Daniel collapsed in relief, but he knew the truth. They were not inspectors. They were scouts. Lyra stepped out from the bedroom pale and trembling. She whispered that she had felt their intentions like a pressure against her mind. Daniel did not ask how she knew. He believed her instantly. That night he packed a small bag with essentials and told her they might need to leave quickly. She watched him with wide eyes and asked softly where they could go. Daniel had no answer. The break came sooner than he expected. It was late at night when the door burst open. Armed men poured in, their weapons gleaming under the dim lights. They moved with precision like professionals hired not by the city, but by the corporation that owned its hidden veins. Daniel shouted for Lyra to run, but she stood frozen by fear. The men barked orders claiming the girl was property, an asset stolen from secure storage. Daniel's blood boiled at the word property. He threw himself at the nearest intruder in a desperate move. The fight was brief and brutal. He was strong from dock work but outmatched. He hit the floor winded as one of the men raised a weapon toward him. Lyra's scream filled the room. Light burst from her body in a blinding wave. The men staggered back, cursing as their devices sparked and died. Every screen in the apartment shattered and the hum of machines went silent. In the chaos, Daniel pulled himself up and grabbed her hand. Together they bolted through the back exit into the alley beyond. Rain poured down, soaking them, but neither stopped. They ran through streets lit with neon until their lungs burned. When they finally collapsed under the shadow of an abandoned overpass, Daniel held her close. She wept into his chest, whispering that she had not meant to lose control. Daniel whispered back that she had saved them. He could still feel the warmth of her energy in his bones, a reminder that she was no ordinary being but something far greater. From that night on, they were fugitives. Daniel could not return to his apartment. His face would be flagged and cameras would track him if he dared walk through familiar streets. He led Lyra into the underbelly of the city, where shadows stretched long and forgotten tunnels offered hiding places. They met the outcasts who lived away from corporate eyes, scavengers and drifters who asked no questions so long as Daniel paid with labor or scraps. Lyra stayed close to him, never letting go of his hand in crowded alleys. Her trust in him was unshakable, but Daniel felt the crushing weight of responsibility. He had chosen to protect her, and now the full strength of the corporation would hunt them both. Yet when he looked into her eyes, he saw not just fear but something stronger, a resolve that matched his own. She was no longer only a helpless girl. She was awakening to what she truly was. One evening, as they rested in a tunnel lit by flickering lamps, Lyra spoke in a voice steadier than he had ever heard. She told him that the men were not wrong in saying she was made, but not in the way they believed. She was not a pet nor a machine. She was part of something greater, a child of a distant people placed here for reasons she could not fully recall. The capsule had been a vessel, not a toy. She pressed his hand against her heart and whispered that she belonged with him now because he had chosen to see her as more than property. Daniel listened with a mixture of awe and dread. He realized the corporation had not only discovered her, but likely knew more than he did about what she represented. They would never stop chasing. Their greed for her power would be endless. But Daniel made his decision long before the words left his lips. He told her she was not alone and never would be. Whatever storms came, they would face them together. The hunt life on the run hardened Daniel quickly. He had never thought of himself as a criminal or an outlaw, yet each step he took with Lyra through the city's forgotten alleys reminded him that he had crossed a line the moment he chose to protect her. The corporation's reach was long. Surveillance drones buzzed above the rooftops and armored patrols combed the streets. He and Lyra learned to move only at night, slipping through drainage tunnels and old train lines abandoned long ago. They slept in corners where cameras could not see, and traded small favors for food from those who lived outside the official grid. Lyra adapted with remarkable speed. Her fear had not disappeared, but she now carried a quiet determination. She asked Daniel to teach her more words, more stories, more ways to blend into human life. She practiced expressions in front of cracked mirrors, copying laughter and frowns until they seemed almost natural. But at the same time, her powers began to show themselves more often. Lights flickered when she felt strong emotion. Machines sometimes responded to her presence, turning on or off without touch. Daniel worried every time it happened for fear it would draw unwanted attention. One evening, they sheltered in the basement of an old factory. Daniel sat sharpening a piece of scrap metal into a makeshift weapon, while Lyra traced glowing shapes in the air with her fingers. He asked her softly if she remembered more about where she came from. Lyra closed her eyes and after a long pause said she remembered stars not like the ones above the city, but vast and bright in colors human eyes rarely saw. She remembered voices calling her name but fading as if pulled away by distance. She remembered the capsule closing around her like a cradle, and then nothing until she saw Daniel's face. Her words sent a chill through him because they confirmed she had not been created here, but sent from somewhere far beyond Earth. Their conversation was interrupted by the whine of engines outside. Daniel peered through a crack and saw armored vehicles rolling slowly down the street, their lights sweeping across ruins. He pulled Lyra close, whispering that they had to leave. They crawled through a service tunnel just before boots pounded the factory floor above. The hunt had come closer than ever. Days later, while crossing the lower market, they heard a street vendor whisper news of a reward offered for a man traveling with a strange girl. The description was vague, but the fear in Daniel's chest told him it was only a matter of time before it became precise. He decided they could no longer remain in the heart of the city. He guided Lyra toward the outskirts where the towers grew fewer, and the ruins of older times stretched wide. During their journey, Lyra revealed more pieces of her memory. She explained that she was not an accident but part of a test placed among humans to see if they would care for what was different or treat it as a tool. She had not expected kindness. She confessed that when Daniel covered her with his blanket and spoke softly that first night, she had felt something new, something her kind called bonding. It was rare even among her people, and once formed it could not be broken. Daniel listened with heavy silence, realizing that his simple choice of compassion had tied him to something vast and unimaginable. In the outskirts, they found refuge with a group of nomads who lived off the grid. These people cared little for corporate law and welcomed anyone who carried their own weight. Daniel worked with them, repairing machinery and carrying supplies, while Lyra fascinated the children with her glowing tricks, though Daniel urged her to keep them small. The nomads offered food and shelter, but warned that corporate agents sometimes raided even these lands. Safety was never certain. One night, as firelight flickered across the camp, Lyra sat beside Daniel and whispered that she could feel others searching for her, not only humans, but something beyond. She did not know if they were friends or enemies. Daniel felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. If her people were truly coming, then the corporation's hunt might only be the beginning. He realized Earth could become a battlefield for forces far greater than anyone imagined. Still, he held her hand and told her she was not alone. He promised that no matter who came, he would stand by her. She looked at him with eyes shining in the glow of the fire and whispered that she believed him. For Daniel, it was enough. In that moment, the noise of pursuit and the fear of discovery faded, leaving only the bond that had grown between them. But beyond the circle of firelight, eyes watched. Scouts of the corporation had tracked them to the outskirts. Reports were already being sent back through encrypted channels. The order was clear: capture the girl at all costs. Daniel and Lyra had survived many close calls, but the hunt was narrowing and the storm was about to break upon them. The choice. The peace they had found among the nomads did not last long. At first it seemed like the perfect refuge, a place where no one asked questions and everyone had their own scars from living beyond the reach of corporate power. Daniel almost allowed himself to believe they might stay there for weeks or even months. But the shadow of pursuit hung heavy in his mind and his instincts proved right. It was dawn when the attack came. The sound of engines roared across the plain and armored transports appeared like dark beasts against the rising sun. Daniel shook Lyra awake and rushed her out of the tent as drones screamed overhead scanning the camp. The nomads scrambled to defend themselves, but they had little more than rifles and scrap weapons. Against corporate soldiers armed with energy rifles, they stood no chance. Daniel and Lyra ran toward the old ridge, but the soldiers moved fast, cutting off escape. They were surrounded within minutes. Lyra clung to Daniel's arm, trembling, but Daniel stepped in front of her, ready to fight with nothing but a blade he had sharpened himself. The leader of the squad raised a hand and ordered Daniel to surrender the girl. He said she was not human property and must be returned to rightful owners. Daniel spat back that she was not property at all. His defiance earned him a strike from a rifle butt that sent him crashing to the ground. Lyra screamed and reached for him, but soldiers restrained her quickly with restraints that glowed with dampening energy. Daniel's vision blurred as he was dragged alongside her. They were thrown into a transport and carried away from the ruins of the nomad camp. Daniel could still hear the sounds of fire and destruction fading behind them. He clenched his fists in helpless fury. He had sworn to protect her, yet here they were in the hands of the very people he feared most. The transport delivered them to a hidden facility, carved deep into stone beneath the outskirts. Cold corridors stretched endlessly and machines hummed with sterile rhythm. Daniel was chained to a chair in one chamber while Lyra was taken to another. Through the wall he could hear her cries echo faintly before silence swallowed them. Hours passed as he fought against his restraints until his wrists bled. Finally, a man in a pristine suit entered the chamber and studied Daniel with a calm expression. The man introduced himself as a director of the corporation's Advanced Research Division. He explained that Lyra was never meant to be found by someone like Daniel. She was a key to unlocking a new age of technology and power. The man leaned forward and promised Daniel wealth and freedom if he cooperated. All Daniel had to do was step aside and let them study her. Daniel's answer was simple. He refused. He told the director that Lyra was not a specimen or a weapon but a person, and she had chosen to trust him. The refusal did not surprise the director. He simply smiled and said Daniel would be made irrelevant soon enough. When the guards returned, Daniel was dragged through sterile halls until he was thrown into a chamber separated from Lyra by transparent barriers. He could see her restrained on a platform surrounded by machines humming with strange lights. Her eyes met his, and even through fear there was determination. The scientists began their work speaking in clipped tones. They attempted to measure her energy, to force her to display her powers, but she resisted. The machines pulsed angrily each time she refused. At last, in a clear voice, she declared that she belonged to no one. She looked directly at Daniel and said he was her guardian, and that bond could not be broken. The words carried a weight that shook the chamber itself. Energy burst from her body in waves that shattered restraints and melted machines. The scientists stumbled back in terror. Daniel felt the heat against his skin even from behind the barrier. Alarms blared through the facility as lights flickered and died. The director appeared again, furious, shouting for containment, but it was too late. Lyra stood free, her glow brighter than ever. She turned toward Daniel and raised her hand. The barrier dissolved into nothing, leaving only silence. Daniel stepped forward and she collapsed into his arms, exhausted, but smiling faintly. She whispered that she had remembered something important. Her people had a tradition of choosing a guardian, and she had chosen him. That bond was sacred beyond any law or force. Daniel held her close, trembling with relief and fear. He knew the corporation would never stop. Yet at the same time he realized they had unleashed something far greater than they understood. Lyra was not a child to be tamed or an experiment to be dissected. She was a bridge between worlds. As guards swarmed the chamber, Daniel lifted her and prepared to fight once more. But this time he felt her strength flow into him like a tide. For the first time he believed they might survive, not because of his defiance alone, but because Lyra's awakening had changed everything. Together they were no longer prey. Together they were something more. The transformation and farewell chaos filled the underground facility as alarms screamed and soldiers scrambled through the corridors. Daniel carried Lyra in his arms, though she was growing heavier with each step, not from her weight but from the energy pulsing around her body. She whispered that she could walk, and when he set her down, she stood tall, her silver-blue hair shimmering with light that seemed to flow from within. For the first time, Daniel saw not the frightened girl who had appeared in his apartment, but someone older in spirit, someone who carried the strength of an ancient people. The soldiers poured into the chamber, aiming rifles, but none fired. There, weapons sparked uselessly as Lyra lifted her hand, and the energy around her bent reality itself. Metal warped and lights exploded in showers of sparks. The director shouted for them to hold their ground, but his voice shook with fear. Daniel stepped closer to Lyra, gripping a broken piece of steel, like a blade ready to defend her, even though he knew he was no match for such numbers. Yet Lyra turned to him with calm eyes and whispered that it was not his fight any longer. In that instant, the ceiling above them shuddered. A low rumble spread through the facility as if the earth itself had awakened. A tear of light split the air in the chamber, and from it descended shapes unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. Tall figures cloaked in radiant armor stepped through, carrying the weight of stars in their presence. Their eyes glowed with the same silver hue as Lyra's, and when they spoke, their voices resonated inside Daniel's mind rather than his ears. They declared they had come for their child. The director fell to his knees, begging to be spared, insisting that the girl belonged to the corporation. One of the figures silenced him with a single glance, and the machines around him melted into slag. Lyra looked up at them with trembling lips, calling them kin. Yet when they reached for her, she stepped back closer to Daniel. She told them she had chosen her guardian and would not leave without honoring that bond. The figures studied Daniel with unreadable eyes, and for a long moment the chamber held only silence. Daniel's heart pounded. He did not know what they would do. He feared they might take her by force or erase him from existence with a single gesture. But instead, the tallest figure lowered its head and said that the bond was sacred even among their kind. They had sent Lyra to test humanity's heart, and Daniel had answered. By caring for her not as property but as family, he had passed the trial. Lyra turned to Daniel, her eyes filled with tears. She whispered that her time with him had given her more than survival. It had given her love and belonging. She told him she would never forget his kindness and that her people would never again see humanity as blind or cold. She pressed her forehead against his, and in that moment, Daniel felt memories not his own flash through his mind. Stars beyond stars, galaxies of light, and a vast people who watched him now with new respect. But Lyra's body was fading, becoming more like light than flesh. She explained softly that she had to return with her kin, or the rift between their worlds would never close. If she stayed, Earth might be torn apart by forces not meant to touch it. Daniel clenched her hands, refusing to let go, but she smiled with warmth and whispered that their bond would never be broken. Wherever she went, she would carry him in her spirit. The armored figures opened the rift wider, and the chamber filled with a wind that tasted of starlight. Lyra stepped toward it, but paused one last time to look back. She said in a clear voice that humanity had been judged not by its machines or its power, but by the heart of one man who chose compassion. Then she vanished into the light, and the rift sealed behind her, leaving only silence. Daniel fell to his knees, the weight of emptiness crashing down upon him. The facility around him crumbled as if the very presence of her people had unraveled its foundations. He stumbled through smoke and ruin until he reached the surface where dawn painted the horizon. For a long time he stood there alone, staring at the rising sun. Yet in his heart, he felt something more than loss. He felt strength. He carried her, promise with him that humanity was no longer invisible among the stars. Lyra had left, but her people had seen and remembered. Daniel had changed the fate of mankind not with weapons or wealth, but with simple care for another being. He returned to the city weeks later, living quietly among the crowd once more. Neighbors saw only a weary man carrying scars of struggle, but inside Daniel knew he had walked beside a secret that touched the heavens. Each night he looked at the stars, whispering her name, knowing she was out there somewhere watching as she had promised. The world continued to turn and corporations continued their hunger for power. Yet none of it mattered as much as the memory. of a girl who had once been sold as a pet but became his family. Humanity's first bond with another race had not been written in treaties or battles, but in trust between two souls. And as Daniel closed his eyes each night, he could still feel her presence, a faint glow within him, reminding him that compassion had the power to reshape worlds. Humanity's bond. Daniel stood beneath the sky that stretched endless above the ruined plains, his body tired and his heart heavy, but his spirit burning brighter than it ever had. Before he had faced a choice that no man was prepared for, the choice to protect a being who had not belonged to his world, and he had chosen without hesitation because when he first looked into Lyra's eyes, he had not seen an experiment or property. He had seen a soul in need of kindness. The world around him would never understand the journey he had taken. The corporation would write false reports and governments would deny what had happened. But Daniel knew the truth, and that truth was carved deeper into him than any scar. Lyra had been real. She had trusted him, she had chosen him, and in that choice she had shown her people that humanity was capable of compassion, even in the face of fear and greed. He remembered the moment she had stepped into the light to return to her kin, her hand warm in his, her voice soft but unshaken as she promised he would never be forgotten. And he had felt the strength of her people, the weight of ancient stars pressing down upon him, not to crush him but to honor him, as if all of them were saying, "You have proven your kind is worthy." And in that moment Daniel realized he had carried the hope of his entire species without even knowing it. Life afterward was quieter. He returned to the city, blending back into the sea of faces. No one knew what he had endured, and no one knew the secret that had once lived in his small apartment. Yet he carried it every day like a flame that would never die. The machines of the corporation still ruled the streets, the towers still glowed with hollow light. But Daniel walked with a different strength because he knew something greater waited among the stars, and that something now looked upon humanity with respect. At night, when he sat by his window staring at the constellations, he would whisper, her name Lyra. And though no answer came, he felt warmth stir inside him as if she was listening across the void. He imagined her, standing beneath alien skies, speaking of him, to her people, telling them that a human had chosen to care, instead of conquer, that a human had been willing to risk everything for one who was different, and that humanity was more than the galaxy. Believed. He never sought recognition, never wanted glory. His gift was the memory of her smile and the bond that even time and distance could not erase. He had begun this path, seeking only a companion to ease his loneliness, and instead had become the guardian of a secret that forever changed the way two worlds would see each other. The story of Daniel and Lyra was not written in books, nor spoken in halls of power. It was etched in the stars themselves, and though his life moved on quietly, the meaning of it echoed far beyond him. He had bought what he thought was a smart pet, but he had found a friend, a daughter, a bridge to the unknown, and through her he had given humanity its first step into a future where they were not alone. Daniel closed his eyes one last time beneath the glow of the city lights and felt peace, for he knew that somewhere Lyra still remembered him and still carried the bond that nothing could break, and that was enough to change the fate of mankind forever. The end.